Hello, you lovely lot, and welcome back for another instalment of 80s Musical Mayhem, courtesy of me, the 80s Mixtaper. Hope you're all having a lovely week and finding sources of water to keep your plants alive or even bathe. Starting to feel a little Mad Max apocalyptic out there at the moment. Well, to help with the rain dances, we have the back end of October 1982 and Playlist 49 coming up on this show. But before we get into it, here's a little recap for any newbies on what this show is about. Back in 2016, at the ripe age of 38, I set upon the most midlife crisis ever by deciding to listen to every single UK single from the 31st of December 1979 to the 31st of December 1989. As a 90s indie kid, I felt I never truly appreciated the music of my childhood, so I undertook this bonkers endeavour. A dash of All About Eve and some Shakin' Stevens later, and by 2021 I'd completed just the most lovely musical odyssey, and I'm here now to take you on that same journey. This podcast is the child of that story, playing all the best, most interesting and most odd songs, and telling the stories behind them. So what do we have in store today? Well, as mentioned, it's October 1982, and after a few mad weeks of introducing some absolute megastars, things settle down a little bit now, but are no less interesting. Today, we meet dreadlocked maestro himself, Eddy Grant. We also meet John Mellencamp and legend Dionne Warwick. Diana Ross pairs up with Michael Jackson for a very different kind of hit. The wheels finally come off for ABBA, and we look at their legacy. The mood proved the highs and lows of the record industry, and we end by meeting the unstoppable force in alternative music that is Killing Joke. Unfortunately, due to copyright rules, I can't actually play the songs in the pod, but if you would like to play along with the show, you'll find playlists for both Spotify and Apple Music in the episode description, along with the full track listing. I know that on some podcast sites the hyperlinks don't pull across, and hence I've listed the tracks as well. So without further ado, let's get back to the music. Let's start today on Playlist 49 with the absolute exhaustion of a groove that tries to outrun its own baggage. What does that mean exactly? Well, it's late 1982. You are standing inside a packed disco or a corner pub, or maybe just sitting next to a radio somewhere in London. And a song comes on that sounds like a tropical breeze made entirely of synthesizers and bounce. It has this lovely perky energy. It makes your feet move before your brain can even process what's happening. It feels like an invitation. It feels like a celebration. But then you look closely at the man singing it. He has these magnificent long sweeping dreadlocks, an intense stare, and a voice that sounds like a gravel road. And the very first thing he tells you, with absolute unyielding certainty, is that he does not want to do the exact thing the music is forcing you to do. I Don't Want to Dance, Eddy Grant sings. This is track 1, Playlist 49. I Don't Want to Dance, Dance With You Baby No More. It is one of the great head fakes in pop music history, a massive global dance floor smash that is explicitly, fundamentally about refusing to participate. It is a song that reached number 1 on the UK singles chart in November 1982, staying there for 3 weeks. It topped charts in Ireland, New Zealand, Switzerland and the Netherlands. It led across the Atlantic and stalled out at number 53 on the Billboard Hot 100 in late 1983. The man behind it is, of course, Eddy Grant. And before we understand why he didn't want to dance anymore, we have to understand how he spent 2 decades building the floor everyone else was dancing on. So we cross now over to Plaisance, British Guyana, where Edmund Montague Grant was born on the 5th of March 1948. Growing up, his parents lived and worked in London, sending money back home for his education. In 1960, at 12 years old, he emigrated to London to join them, settling in Kentish Town. By 1965, a teenage Grant was completely immersed in the burgeoning British rock, R&B and ska scenes. He formed a group called the Equals. Long before the two-tone movement or the late 70s punk explosion made integration a visible political statement, the Equals were pioneering. They were one of the first prominently recognised racially mixed pop rock bands in the United Kingdom. The lineup was beautifully split between Jamaican-born singer Derv Gordon on lead vocals, his twin brother Lincoln Gordon on rhythm guitar, Eddy on lead guitar, alongside white British musicians Patrick Lloyd on bass and John Hall on drums. They slugged it out on the London pub and club circuit, eventually signing with President Records. Their early efforts didn't hit immediately in the UK, but Grant's songwriting quickly proved to be a powerhouse. He penned a track we might all know called Baby Come Back. First released as a B-side in 1967, it eventually exploded after gaining traction in Europe, climbing all the way to number 1 on the UK singles chart in 1968. Grant was just 20 years old, pulling the strings of a chart-topping pop phenomenon. He even wrote Police on My Back, a fierce track from that same era that The Clash would famously cover on their Sandinista album. But the rock and roll lifestyle took a brutal toll. In 1969, the band survived a serious car accident in Germany. The compounding physical stress culminated on New Year's Day in 1971, where Grant suffered a sudden near-fatal heart attack and a collapsed lung at the age of just 23. The doctors were clear. The relentless grind of touring had to stop. So Eddie Grant pivoted. If he couldn't tour the world, he would build his own world. He left the Equals in 1971 and established Coach House Studios in Stamford Hill, North London. He also founded his own independent record label, Ice Records, in 1974. This wasn't a vanity project. Coach House became a critical incubator for developing independent African and Caribbean music within the British landscape. Grant's solo career was a great example of fierce self-reliance. His early solo albums struggled commercially, but by 1979 he broke through with the thunderous social political track Living on the Front Line. What made Grant unique was his meticulous solitary recording process. On his solo records, he was the entire band. He played every single instrument, sang every vocal layer, and produced every track by himself. By 1982, Grant was crafting his 5th solo album, Killer on the Rampage. The album would eventually yield his monumental hit Electric Avenue, which we'll hear soon, but its lead single was I Don't Wanna Dance. The track was conceived during a tour while Grant was waiting in a dressing room, outlining the chorus tone by tone. While appearing superficially like a standard breakup song about a partner seen out with others, Grant viewed himself as a protest writer. He noted that the song symbolised his departure from a Britain fractured by division, explaining that it represented a refusal to go along with established ideas. But his relocation to Barbados isn't where the song's story concludes. It's actually where the track itself was forged in chaos. When Grant boarded the plane to leave the UK behind, the airline lost all of his luggage. Packed inside those missing bags were his working masters and the entire collection of songs he had been developing in London. Suddenly facing strict distribution deadlines from his label with no material to show for it, Grant had to react immediately. He rushed the construction of his new Blue Wave Studios complex in St Philip, Barbados, scrambled inside and single-handedly recorded a fresh batch of tracks to replace the lost ones. Out of that pressure cooker came the final pristine production of I Don't Wanna Dance. Grant arranged the track using a 7-inch single format that uniquely featured an entirely a cappella mix on the B-side, exposing the raw vocal layers of his solo isolation. When it hit the airwaves, the song took on a life of its own. It became his only solo number 1 single on the UK charts, reaching the summit exactly 14 years after he had last stood there with the Equals. To promote it, Grant filmed a vibrant music video featuring his family driving across the island in local mini-mokes, embedding his new Barbadian life into the visual identity of the track. It proved that sometimes the only way to build a massive global hit is to completely refuse to dance to anyone else's tune. For track 2, a man who was also a big cat. But this isn't about the TV series Manimal. Remember that? I do. Very excited when it came out. and it ended up being a so-so TV show, and later on a lyric in a Foo Fighters song from 1998. Anyway, this is actually about John Cougar Mellencamp. John Mellencamp did not choose to be a cougar. Born in Seymour, Indiana in 1951, he survived a pioneering risky surgery to correct spina bifida when he was just 9 days old. As a teenager, he fronted a soul band called Crep Soul at 14, eloped at 19, and graduated with an associate degree from Vincennes University in 1975. When manager Tony DeFries signed him to a deal, DeFries insisted on renaming him Johnny Cougar for his 1976 debut album, The Chestnut Street Incident. Mellencamp vehemently protested the name, but was flatly overruled. His earliest albums failed to gain commercial traction, but he finally achieved a mainstream breakthrough in late 1979 when his track I Need a Lover climbed the charts. By 1982, he was 30 years old, continually clashing with his record company over his musical direction and working at Criteria Studios in Miami. He was crafting the tracks for an album titled American Fool. During the writing process, he consciously aimed to write about seemingly insignificant everyday things, building on the philosophy that coming to terms with failed expectations is what truly matters in life. Preaching to the converted there, mate. Anyway, here is the second single from that landmark album and the story of Jack and Diane. Press play now. Jack and Diane was released as a single in 1982. It went on to spend 4 consecutive weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in October, solidifying its place as the most successful hit single of Mellencamp's entire career. Despite its monumental success, the singer spent decades being highly dismissive of the track, admitting in a Forbes Sunday Conversation interview that he always detested it. The track was notoriously difficult and frustrating to piece together in the studio. Mellencamp later noted that while the song sounded great when he played it by himself on an acoustic guitar, he struggled immensely to get his band to play along with its unconventional arrangement. The creative breakthrough arrived with the assistance of an unexpected, legendary collaborator, Mick Ronson, the former guitarist and arranger for David Bowie. Ronson spent several weeks at Criteria Studios helping arrange the American Fool sessions. It was Ronson who suggested adding the distinctive, unusual percussion that sounded like baby rattles, and he masterminded the multi-layered choir-like vocal hook on the Let It Rock, Let It Roll segment. The structure of the song was further shaped by contemporary music production. The signature isolated drum solo in the middle of the track, featuring Kenny Aronoff's thunderous hits, was directly inspired by the dramatic drum sequencing of Phil Collins' 1981 solo smash In the Air Tonight. Mellencamp also utilised hand clapping during the recording, strictly as a temporary metronome to keep time. Though it was supposed to be removed in the final mix, he realised the song's momentum completely fell apart without it and chose to leave it in. Lyrically, the song details a bittersweet vignette of working class teenagers growing up in the heartland of the Midwest. They suck on chili dogs outside a Tasty Freeze and wear Bobby Brooks clothes. However, the core identity of the characters was heavily altered before the public ever heard it. Mellencamp originally wrote the track about an interracial couple, inspired by the changing social dynamics he witnessed while touring the United States. Jack was originally an African American. Executives at his record company, Riva Records, strongly objected to the racial themes, asking him to alter the character's background to avoid commercial controversy. Mellencamp initially resisted, arguing that a song about race relations was the entire point of the track. Ultimately, being young and facing intense label pressure, he relented and reworked Jack into a standard high school football star. To finish the revised narrative, he drew thematic inspiration from the 1962 film adaptation of Tennessee Williams' play Sweet Bird of Youth. The iconic music video became an MTV staple through pure stealth and a favour. The record label didn't believe in Jack and Diane as a hit and refused to fund a dedicated music video, choosing instead to only finance videos for Hurt So Good and Hand to Hold On To. Mellencamp approached director Paul Flattery and asked for help. Flattery saved exactly one single roll of film from the other shoots to film Mellencamp singing. They then stole editing time in Los Angeles, projecting old family snapshots and childhood home videos onto an editing room wall to cobble the video together for free. To create the visual hand clap scene in the video, a tape operator literally wore white gloves while executing the movements. Decades later, Mellencamp's perspective on his biggest hit softened. In his January 2022 interview with Forbes, he revealed he had finally begun to appreciate the track after watching a football game halftime show where 80,000 stadium fans spontaneously sang along to his little ditty about Jack and Diane. Today, we arrive at the feet of an established legend on our musical map and one of my mum's favourite artists, indeed one of my favourite artists. This track marks our very first encounter with an absolute titan of American popular music. We may have already met Diana Ross, now it's time to meet another megastar of the 60s, Dionne Warwick. Let us drop the needle on the lead single and title track of her album, released by Arista Records in September 1982. This is track 3 today, this is Heartbreaker. Let us begin by looking at the extraordinary path this song's vocalist took to get here. She was born Marie Dionne Warwick on December the 12th, 1940 in East Orange, New Jersey. Music was woven directly into her family tree. Her mother, Lee Drinkard, was a member of the famous gospel group the Drinkard Singers. At just 6 years old, at the request of her grandfather, the Reverend Elzay Warwick, she made her singing debut at the New Hope Baptist Church. As she grew, she formalised her immense natural talent, eventually attending the Hart School of the University of Hartford. While working as a session backing vocalist in New York, fate intervened. She met the brilliant young composer Burt Bacharach, who invited her to sing on demo recordings he was crafting with lyricist Hal David. Her voice perfectly navigated Bacharach's famously complex time signatures and sophisticated melodic phrasings. In 1962, she released her debut solo single, Don't Make Me Over. When the vinyl pressings arrived from Scepter Records, a typesetter had accidentally misspelled her surname as Warwick with a W instead of Warwick with 2 R's. The record became a hit, and she simply decided to keep the typo for the rest of her professional life. Over the next decade, the Bacharach-David Warwick partnership defined the sound of sophisticated 1960s pop soul, churning out historic masterworks like Walk On By, I Say a Little Prayer, and Do You Know the Way to San Jose. However, as we know, pop careers are famously fragile and often impacted by the whims of others. In the early 1970s, Bacharach and David acrimoniously dissolved their partnership, leaving Warwick professionally stranded and legally entangled. A temporary commercial salvation arrived in 1974 when she secured her very first Billboard Hot 100 #1 by teaming up with the soul group The Spinners for the smash Then Came You. Yet, subsequent releases failed to maintain that momentum, and her career faced a stark commercial decline. Her grand rescue from obscurity came courtesy of Clive Davis and Arista Records, who signed her and paired her with a certain Barry Manilow acting as a producer for her 1979 album, Dionne. It went platinum, winning her multiple Grammy Awards for the singles I'll Never Love This Way Again and Deja Vu. By the dawn of the 80s, she was fully revitalised, even becoming a ubiquitous presence on television screens as the host of the highly popular musical countdown show Solid Gold. Which brings us directly to 1982. Barry Gibb, an ardent admirer of Warwick's historic catalogue, actively gushed about her talent to Arista chief Clive Davis. Sensing a golden opportunity, Davis arranged a meeting, and Barry Gibb, alongside his production partners Albie Galutin and Cole Richardson, signed on to write and produce an entire album for her. The title track, Heartbreaker, was written jointly by all 3 Bee Gees, Barry, Robin and Maurice Gibb. The song features Barry Gibb's highly distinct backing vocals layered prominently over the chorus. Yet, Despite the song's undeniable pop pedigree, its recording session was anything but smooth sailing. Warwick herself openly admitted in Wesley Hyatt's The Billboard Book of #1 Adult Contemporary Hits that she was initially not a fan of the song at all. She recorded it purely because she deeply respected and trusted the Bee Gees' track record for writing massive hits. On the other side of the glass, Maurice Gibb experienced his own intense wave of emotion. He later recalled, "I cried my eyes out after we wrote it. I drove home and thought, we should be doing this one. And when she did, it was brilliant." He added that because Barry sang on it, it effectively became a duet between Barry and Dionne Warwick. The public agreed overwhelmingly with the Gibb brothers' instincts. Released in September 1982, Heartbreaker exploded internationally. It debuted on the Billboard Hot 100 on October the 9th, 1982 at number 68, eventually climbing its way to a peak of number 10 on January the 15th, 1983. It also conquered the Billboard Adult Contemporary chart, spending time at the number 1 spot. Internationally, it was an even greater hit, peaking at number 1 in Sweden and Portugal and holding steady at number 2 in the UK. While the full Heartbreaker album sold an estimated 3 million copies worldwide, the single is her most successful solo hit of the entire 1980s. As for Warwick's initial dislike of the track, regarding its immense international popularity, she later wittily put any lingering artistic doubts to rest by famously quipping, "I cried all the way to the bank." Well now, we can't mention the Queen Dionne Warwick without Diana Ross having something to say about it, and so it is with our next track. When we last spoke about Diana Ross, we were breaking down Mirror Mirror, the glittering, aggressive second single from her 1981 RCA Records debut album, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? That album, her statement of independence. After 2 decades with Berry Gordy at Motown Records, Ross walked away to sign a $20 million recording contract with RCA, the most lucrative recording contract in history at the time. She wanted full creative control, and she proved she could handle it. She produced Why Do Fools herself, a gamble that paid off when the album was certified platinum by the RIAA. But by the summer of 1982, pop music was shifting underneath everyone's feet. The charts were dominated by computerized production and synth grooves. Olivia Newton-John had recently spent 10 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 with Physical, a song that weaponized the 1980s aerobics craze into a sweaty spandex-covered hit. Diana Ross needed an answer to that landscape. She needed a track that could bridge the gap between her classic R&B royalty status and this strange, hyper-vibrant new decade. So she went into the studio to record her second RCA album, Silk Electric. And for the lead single, she turned the control panel over to someone else. She turned to a 24-year-old friend she had known since he was a child. A young man who was, at that exact second, putting the final touches on a small album called Thriller. You might have heard of it. She called Michael Jackson. For a man with a live frame, what he actually gave her was muscles. This is track 4. Muscles was released on September the 17th, 1982. It is a very unique piece of R&B geometry, and for Diana Ross, quite sexy, it has to be said. This was a new tune to me when I did my original listen through, and it really is a little steamy for her canon, but it's a great track. It doesn't sound like the sweeping orchestral arrangements of her early solo career or the driving funk bass of Upside Down. It's quite sparse, relying on electronic texture and sultry whispers. The song features synths played by Bill Wolfer and Greg Smith, alongside acoustic guitar work by David Williams and a steady drum pattern by Jonathan Moffett. Over this sparse, echoing digital landscape, Diana Ross delivers a vocal performance that alternates between breathy spoken word intimacy and desperate demand. The story of Muscles is entirely the story of the unique lifelong relationship between Diana Ross and Michael Jackson. While Motown's early publicity machine claimed that Diana Ross originally discovered the Jackson 5, they were actually brought to the label by Bobby Taylor and Gladys Knight. Still, Ross acted as their official industry presenter, introducing them to the public and lending her massive star power to their debut album, Diana Ross Presents the Jackson 5. Because of this, Michael Jackson viewed Ross as a maternal figure, a mentor and a muse. In 1978, they starred together in the film adaptation of The Wiz, Ross as Dorothy, Jackson as the Scarecrow. By 1982, Jackson was obviously becoming a force in global entertainment, but he still wanted to write a custom-built pop masterpiece specifically for Diana. The track was written and produced entirely by Michael Jackson. According to his 1988 autobiography Moonwalk, the title of the song was not originally inspired by a human being at all. Muscles was actually the name of Michael Jackson's pet boa constrictor. But when he sat down to write the lyrics for Ross, he flipped the concept entirely into a tongue-in-cheek, sexually assertive female perspective. In an era where male pop stars routinely sang about women's bodies, Jackson had Diana Ross openly objectifying men. She sings about how other women want a man who is understanding or a guy with a nice personality, but Ross rejects those demands. She states clearly, "I need what the eyes can see, his anatomy, dirty sod." She wants muscles all over his body. If you listen closely to the mix of the track, the background vocals are where the true vocal magic happens. Jackson brought in legendary session singers Maxine and Julia Waters, alongside Grammy-winning artist Patti Austin. But layered deep within those harmonies are the uncredited, soft, airy backing vocals of Michael Jackson himself. The song became yet another hit for Ross. It peaked at number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 in November 1982, number 7 in Cashbox, and rose all the way to number 4 on the Billboard Soul chart. The song also secured Diana Ross a Grammy Award nomination for Best Female R&B Vocal Performance at the 25th Annual Grammy Awards. The track's accompanying music video featured Ross dreaming in bed while floating through the air over a landscape made entirely of giant muscle-bound male bodies holding her up. Muscles showed that even outside of Motown, and even while competing with the dawn of the MTV era, Diana Ross remained up with the rest of the curve. From the sublime to the ridiculous with our next song. This, folks, is our last dance with ABBA, and what a strange dance it is too. When we last left the Swedish pop titans in early 1982, they were delivering the frantic, slightly forced optimism of Head Over Heels. The track struggled in comparison to their usual standards, stalling at a relatively modest number 25 in the UK charts. The glitter was fading. The marriages inside the band, Agneta and Bjorn, followed by Frida and Benny, had completely unravelled. The initial plan for 1982 was to record a brand new 9th studio album. However, the atmosphere in Polar Studios was heavy, the energy was running low, and the 4 members agreed to pivot. Instead of a full studio album, they packaged their legacy into a double album compilation titled The Singles, The First 10 Years, which ironically turned out to be the last near 40 years, but whatever. To entice buyers, they recorded a handful of new tracks during the 1982 sessions to bookend the collection. One was their final single release of that era, Under Attack, which deserves a passing mention as a perfectly serviceable synth-pop goodbye that peaked at number 26 in the UK, but to be honest, it's a bit dull compared to their other outputs. But the other standout track extracted from those final sessions was something entirely different. It was a stark, experimental, and deeply melancholic piece of art. How do you all feel about this one? This is The Day Before You Came, track 5. The Day Before You Came was officially released on the 18th of October 1982. If you are used to the explosive layered pop geometry of Waterloo or Mamma Mia, this track is a bucket of cold water to the extremities. Let us look at the factual anatomy of this song. It was digitally recorded and mixed on the 20th of August 1982 at Polar Studios in Stockholm under the working title The Suffering Bird. Clocking in at nearly 6 minutes, it is one of the longest tracks in the entire ABBA catalogue. Musically, it belongs almost entirely to the electronic arrangements of Benny Andersson. The foundation of the track relies on his massive Yamaha GX1 synthesizer and a programmable drum machine. However, it wasn't completely solo synth work. The session also included an acoustic guitar layer from Bjorn Ulvaeus and a physical snare drum played by musician Akka Sundqvist. Then you had Agnetta's lead vocal. There are no soaring, joyful harmonies here. Bjorn wrote a lyric sheet that reads like a completely mundane diary entry. Agneta sings about a woman listing the utterly ordinary details of her daily routine, taking the train to work, smoking a cigarette, having lunch at the usual place, reading a book and watching television. All of these events are explicitly framed as what her life looked like the day before you came. And the artistic genius and the factual truth of the track lies in its complete ambiguity. The song never actually explains who he or what happens when he arrives. Is it a wonderful romance that rescues her from the mundane? Or given the funereal synth pad and the haunting operatic backing vocals provided by Annifrid, is there a darker, more foreboding subtext? The listener is left to fill in the blanks. Longtime sound engineer Michael Trello later recalled that Agneta performed the lead vocal with the studio lights dimmed, and the heavy atmosphere made everyone present feel that this marked the definitive end of the band. The public in 1982 didn't quite know what to make of this tonal shift. ABBA was used to global domination, but this track failed to secure a foothold, even in the UK top 20, peaking at number 32. However, mainland Europe responded differently. The single reached number 5 in West Germany, number 2 in the Netherlands, and hit the top 5 across Belgium, Sweden and Norway. Shortly after its promotion, however, the group entered a multi-decade hiatus. While it wasn't a massive chart topper at the time, the song's critical legacy has grown exponentially. Latterly, reviewers have been quite kind to the song, and just 2 years later in 1984, the British synth-pop duo Blancmange covered the single, taking it to number 22 in the UK charts, outperforming ABBA's original chart position. And so this brings us to the end of the substantial chapter that is ABBA. Perhaps not the biggest voice of the 80s, but including their 70s work, a foundational pop force, still very much beloved to young and old alike. So what is the broader legacy of ABBA as artists and cultural influencers? When they walked away at the end of 1982, there were some contemporary critics frequently dismissing them as Europop fluff. History, however, has completely corrected that error. Their catalogue became a monumental global industry in its own right, driven by the phenomenal success of the ABBA Gold compilation in 1992. Surely that's one that everyone owns. I think it's given out when you turn 16. The theatrical monster Mamma Mia and its subsequent films, and eventually their groundbreaking digital avatar concert residency, ABBA Voyage, more recently. Their strict musical discipline influenced generations of pop creators. Renowned producers and writers from Max Martin to Erasure have cited Benny and Bjorn's meticulous adherence to melodic perfection as a foundational textbook. Even mainstream artists, fiercely protective of their own musical style, sought their blessing. Madonna famously sampled the iconic synth hook from Gimme Gimme Gimme, A Man After Midnight for her 2005 global hit Hung Up, a rare privilege Benny and Bjorn had previously only granted to the Fugees. The Day Before You Came is the final haunting artefact of their original studio era. It was the sound of a legendary pop group going out not on old formulas, but leaving us with a beautiful riddle wrapped in a synth melody. For our penultimate track today, we return to a truism that we said in the previous episode when we encountered Blue Zoo with their one-hit wonder Cry Boy Cry. Every musical label wanted the next stars of synth pop. And you have groups emerging from every corner of Britain looking to ride the massive wave of this post-new romantic movement. Some of these bands became permanent fixtures of global pop culture. Duran Duran and Spandau, two prime examples. Others burned incredibly brightly for just a few fleeting moments before the major labels shifted their focus elsewhere. Today, we focus on a band that seemed to capture that pristine neon essence, at least for a while, and a song that showcased what could have been. The band is called The Mood. The song is Passion in Dark Rooms. This is track 6. Never heard that song before? Well, that probably tells the story of the band without us having to. But let's do them the justice they deserve. It's a good song. The Mood formed around 1980 in my old stomping ground, York, North Yorkshire. According to the band's official biography on themood.uk, the core trio, vocalist and keyboardist John Moore, guitarist and keyboardist Mark James Fordyce, and bassist keyboardist Eric James Logan, initially bonded over a shared love for electronic music while hanging out at the independent York music shop Track Records. Shout out there to Track Records, one of the greatest independent music stores and where I spent many hours of my misspent youth in the 90s. Now sadly gone the way of many other indie stores as of 2007. Drawing deep inspiration from standard bearers like Kraftwerk, David Bowie, Japan and Roxy Music, they set out to build a sound that aligned with the emerging new romantic movement sweeping through London's Blitz club scene. Musically, they delivered a style built heavily upon a syncopated driving rhythm. As documented by the Electricity Club, their artistic footprint was shaped by foundational synth and art rock acts like Chibuai Army, Yellow Magic Orchestra, Can, Telex, and Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. The band quickly attracted major label attention, signing a deal with RCA Records that lasted from 1981 to 1985. They built immediate momentum with early singles like Is There a Reason and the rhythmic club track Don't Stop, which managed to cross the Atlantic and achieve a top 10 position on the US Billboard Dance Club Play chart. Back home in the UK, they narrowly missed out on a mainstream media breakthrough. Their 1982 single Paris Is One Day Away climbed all the way to number 42 on the official UK singles chart. It stalled just 2 agonising spots short of the top 40, which would have almost certainly guaranteed them a performance slot on Top of the Pops. But it is their late 1982 single Passion in Dark Rooms that I think is the perfect snapshot of the band. For this track, RCA Records paired the trio with producer Steve Levine. Levine was already a highly respected figure behind the studio desk, having engineered at CBS Studios for legendary acts like The Clash and Sailor. Crucially, when Levine stepped into the studio with The Mood, he brought along guitarist Roy Hay from Culture Club to contribute guest guitar and piano tracks. At that precise moment, Levine and Hay were on the absolute precipice of massive global superstardom, so perhaps some of that industry magic might rub off. But despite its high-end production value and a striking 7-inch picture disc release, the single failed to surpass their previous chart positions in the UK. RCA Records chose not to issue a conventional full-length studio album for the band in their home territory. Instead, the label packaged the single as the title track of a 5-song North American mini-album released in 1983, hoping to ride the coattails of the burgeoning Second British Invasion. The band's momentum subsequently stalled. After releasing a final single called I Don't Need Your Love Now in 1984, the band parted ways with RCA and ultimately split up in 1985. John Moore briefly resurrected the band name with new musicians in 1992, touring north of England under the name The Mood and later Wild, before splitting permanently in 1993. For decades, their music remained out of print until Cherry Red Records compiled their discography for the singles collection in 2008. Good old Cherry Red. More recently, original master tapes were recovered from the Sony RCA archives, resulting in the official 2024 remastered release, the singles 1981 to 1984, finally preserving Passion in Dark Rooms for modern streaming audiences. Passion in Dark Rooms is another reminder that while the ambition and effort can be there, sometimes it takes a supportive label and a dash of luck for the pursuit of fame not to be a cruel endeavour. We end today with some chaos from a lead singer with a piercing crow-like stare and a band determined to ruffle feathers. They're one of my favourite alternative acts of the decade, and to be honest, there's already been opportunities to introduce them, but it's been a case of waiting for a song where the distortion wouldn't make your ears bleed. Well, we've arrived at a less ear-bleeding moment, and they're not just noisy, they are very important. This is our very first encounter with a band that redefined alternative heavy music. It is a group that combined tribal intensity with apocalyptic levels of paranoia, providing a sonic blueprint for decades of alternative rock. I am, of course, talking about the formidable Killing Joke. This is their 1982 single Birds of a Feather. Track 7, Playlist 49, our final song today. Before they became legendary figures of industrial and post-punk music, Killing Joke had to assemble their forces. Keyboardist turned singer Jazz Coleman first crossed paths with drummer Big Paul Ferguson in late 1978 while playing in a backing band. Eager to find like-minded souls to complete their artistic vision, they placed an advert in Melody Maker in early 1979. That advert famously read, "Bass lead to tell the Killing Joke," promising total exploitation, no information and anonymity. That bold search quickly attracted guitarist Kevin "Geordie" Walker and bass player Martin "Youth" Glover. The classic initial four-piece lineup was born. They spent the next 3 years forging a heavy, uncompromising legacy. Their self-titled debut studio album arrived in October 1980 via the Malicious Damage imprint through EG Records, introducing listeners to their signature brutalist sound. They quickly followed that up with What's This For in June 1981. By the time they released their third album, Revelations, in July 1982, the crushing pressure of their intense schedule brought the band to a sudden fracture. Following the release of the Revelations album, Jazz Coleman abruptly left England for Iceland. Geordie Walker soon followed him there to collaborate with local musicians. While Coleman and Walker worked in Iceland, bass player Youth decided to stay in England and officially parted ways with the group. Remarkably, the band did not disintegrate. Instead, Ferguson rejoined Coleman and Walker, and they recruited new bass player Paul Raven, formerly of the punk band Neon Hearts. This newly reorganised lineup immediately began working on fresh material that sparked a surprising, drastically more melodic shift in their musical direction. Before embarking on their North American tour dates that August, which would yield the live album Ha, the band recorded a standalone single that highlighted this new era. That song was Birds of a Feather, a song that shifted Killing Joke away from the relentless abrasive wall of noise that defined Revelations. Instead, it embraced a brighter, driving and distinctly anthemic post-punk sound. It was officially released on the 22nd of October 1982 through EG Records. The single reached number 64 in the UK singles chart. Not great from a pop perspective, but respectable for a band on the fringes. The lyrical content of the song completely rejected the doom-laden prophecies of their earlier records, focusing instead on human connection and a collective instinct. The lyrics celebrate finding comfort and strength in numbers, opening with the lines, "We feel so good as we flock together, so much in common, we all gather, gather, gather. Don't need no manifesto, just a little instinct." This fresh, accessible melodic sensibility directly paved the way for their fourth studio album, Fire Dances, which arrived in 1983. Birds of a Feather demonstrated that they could create beautiful soaring melodies without losing a single ounce of their driving primal power, something that they would finally hone into the ironic anthem called 80s in 1984, and the powerful top 20 hit Love Like Blood in 1985. We shall hear them again on this pod. Hopefully that last track wasn't too much of an assault on the senses, and if you wanted to see what song I was originally going to play as their introduction, check out 1981's Empire Song, but it's just a bit too reverby, I think. Anyway, that's the first half of Playlist 49 done, but do join us next week as we slip finally into November 1982 for a veritable smorgasbord of different genres. Heaven 17 start their ascent to the top of the charts. We meet Supertramp and Men at Work. Renee and Renata have me doing terrible impressions. Rush prove they're more than just Tom Sawyer in the 80s. And Blancmange release their biggest hit. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can find me on Threads, Instagram and TikTok as the 80s Mixtaper. Or if you're old school like me, you can email in to completed80s@aol.com. That's completed80s. Also, if you'd like to support the show, there is a Buy Me a Coffee link in the episode description. But until next Friday, let's pray for rain. It's very dry here in Northamptonshire. And we'll see you next time on I Completed 80s Music. Take care.